Hi boys and girls, welcome back. Today I'm going to be reading about a female composer and artist, and her name was Clara Schumann. She was married to the famous Robert Schumann, although she was quite famous herself as well. In fact, I made an error in the very first YouTube that I made. In the introduction, I talked about Robert Schumann needing police to help control the crowds at his concerts, and it wasn't Robert, it was Clara, okay? So Robert Schumann was famous player and composer, but Clara was much more famous for her playing. She was a better player than he was, actually, if the truth be known. So it was Clara Schumann who needed police at some of her concerts to help control the crowds. She was born in Germany in 1819, and she died in Germany in 1896. She is considered to be one of the greatest pianists of all time, And she was a direct influence on the music of Robert Schumann and Johann Brahms. When Clara was a little girl, a student of her father's used to tease her with scary stories. He would wait till the room got dark and then dress up like a ghost and make shapes in the dim light. The man was Robert Schumann, and when Clara grew up, she married him. Robert became a brilliant composer, but seeing Clara play at age 9 was what gave him the idea of starting a career in music and studying with her father, one of the leading piano teachers in Germany. Clara's childhood was most unusual. She could hardly talk and was at first thought to be a deaf mute. She couldn't talk, so they thought she couldn't hear. Her father, her parents were divorced, started giving her piano lessons partly to reassure himself that she could hear. She began speaking normally at the age of 8. When she was already on her way to becoming a world-famous pianist. Her concerts were so popular, as I said before, police had to be called in to control the crowds. Fancy desserts were named after her, poets wrote poems about her. She was nervous before a concert, rarely satisfied with her performance, and often depressed afterwards, so she was pretty hard on herself. But she found touring exhilarating and made dozens of tours outside of Germany. In every town, she wore a different white dress each night. Chopin called her the only woman in Germany who could play his music. And Robert wrote all his music with her in mind. "Your eyes, you romantic girl," he once wrote, "follow me everywhere, and I often think one cannot make such music without a bride." He used some of her melodies, and she premiered his music, which was considered weird all over Europe. So sometimes when people are doing new music nowadays, we consider it weird. So some of the music that he was writing back then was considered weird. So she was the famous one during her marriage. She was known as Queen of the Piano. Well, he was known as Clara's husband. She was a much better pianist than he, and she could earn more in 3 weeks than he could earn in a year. Clara Schumann composed some 23 piano works, and most of her concerts included at least one of her own works. By age 20, she wrote, "I once thought that I possessed a creative talent, but I have given up that idea. A woman must not desire to be a composer, nor one has done not one has done it, and why should I expect to?" That's an interesting thought. Do you agree or disagree with that? After she was married, she kept performing but stopped composing. Unable to practice whenever Robert was working, she practiced at night when he went out with friends. "There is not even one little hour in the whole day for myself," she said. Besides teaching piano and organizing all the details of her concert tours, she supervised a household of 3 servants, spent several hours each day writing letters, nursed Robert through several breakdowns, and took care of her children. She had 8 within 16 years. She attributed her energy to the long walks she took each day. Clara knew everybody. She knew composers, famous composers like Franz Liszt, Richard Wagner, and Felix Mendelssohn. They all came to her house to dinner. They socialized. Her best friend was Johann Brahms. By the way, that's one of my favorite composers. He was 14 years her junior. She inspired much of his music. "By rights," he wrote, "I should have to inscribe all my best melodies, really, by Clara Schumann." She was left a widow at 37 when Robert died in a hospital. To support her family, she turned to performing full-time. She had a longer career than any man of the time, 60 years, and a much larger repertoire. Only arthritis stopped her from performing As she died at age 77, she asked her grandson to play Robert's music for her. It was the last music that she ever heard. 3 of Clara's daughters and several granddaughters became piano teachers, and many of her students became prominent teachers as well. One, Carl Friedberg, came to the United States and taught at what is now known as Juilliard School of Music in New York City. So I think it's interesting that she didn't think women should be composers, because up to that point apparently women hadn't been composers. So it's kind of an interesting thought, because there are certainly women composers now, right? And again, we're taking these stories from Lives of the Musicians, okay? And it's from Kathleen, K-R-U-L-L, and Catherine Hewitt, and it was published in 1992 by Houghton, Mifflin, Harcourt, in 2 cities, Boston and New York. And I'll see you next time.